Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. This is a early morning show. It's 2:29 in the morning. I'm awake. I wanted to lend my voice to this because I thought this was completely outrageous. Let me make sure my sound is right first before I go into this. Like I said, this one is probably going to be relatively quick. Relatively. And then 3 hours later. Alright, let's see. Levels, good. Playback, good. Perfect. Hope everyone is okay this morning. If you guys haven't subscribed, please feel free to subscribe, particularly if you like the content. Also, feel free to like the video again if you like the content. I saw this yesterday as I was driving home, as we were driving home. Israeli soldiers have live fired into a crowd of peaceful protesters and killed 15 people, but they shot 776 people. 1,400 were injured or wounded. Injured, wounded, the same difference. They were peaceful protesters. And if anybody has a moral right, this kind of moral justification to protest, it will be the forsaken Palestinian people. Let me read the story first before going into this. Israeli military admits massacre of unarmed Gaza protesters was intentional, then deletes the tweets. The IDF said its bloody crackdown of unarmed Palestinian protesters was accurate and measured. After shooting 773 Gazans, not 76, with live ammunition, it wrote on Twitter, "We know where every bullet landed." It's good that you know that. The Israeli military has admitted that its bloody crackdown of unarmed Palestinian protesters was accurate and measured. The Israeli Defense Force was shot 773 Gazans with live ammunition. Likewise said, "We know where every bullet landed." Israeli military made this admission in a post on Twitter before promptly deleting the tweets. The Real News has archived and documented these tweets. Good on the Real News. On Friday 30th, tens of thousands of Gazans living under suffocating and illegal decade-long Israeli blockade held a massive peaceful protest on the Gaza border, demanding the right of Palestinian refugees have under international law to return to their homeland from which Israel expelled them. The Israeli Defense Force met the march with a barrage of bullets, mowing down unarmed protesters in a massacre that immediately prompted international outrage. More than 1,400 Palestinians were injured in the IDF's attack, according to the Palestinian medical officials. Israeli soldiers shot 773 Gaza protesters with live ammunition, killing 16 people. Okay, down here it says 16. More than 1,400 Palestinians were injured in the IDF attack, according to Palestinian medical officials. Israel soldiers, right? The day after the protest, on March 31st, the IDF published a series of posts on its official Twitter account. The Israeli military referred to the unarmed protesters as a riot and an organized terrorist operation. Yesterday, we saw 30,000 people. We arrived prepared and with precision reinforcements, the IDF tweeted. Nothing was carried out uncontrolled, everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed. Soon after writing this, the IDF deleted its 6-tweet thread. The Real News documented the full deleted Twitter thread by archiving the cached version of the IDF's account. IDF. We were only interested in terrorists who are trying to disrupt Israeli life. We only act against them. The citizens of Gaza are not the enemy. Certainly not the women and children that we're holding in an apartheid open-air ghetto. Oh, they didn't put that part there. We have no intention of harming the residents of Gaza who wants to live their lives despite the misfortune under the failed rule of Hamas. So we just shot 773 of them, killing 16 of them. That's all. Yesterday, we saw 30,000 people. We arrived prepared and with precise reinforcements. Nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed. We know where every 773 bullets landed. They send children or disabled people to the fences so they can say that we hurt them. Well, those children and disabled people there leads more credibility to the idea that it was a peaceful protest. I'm just saying, it leads more credibility to the point that this wasn't meant this wasn't a riot. It was a peaceful protest. And you maniacs shot 773 people. Yesterday's riot was an organized terrorist operation behind which stand Hamas's leaders as military wing terrorist organizations such as PIJ, and others, which is why they sent out children and disabled people. The Israeli military's admission that the massacre was intentional and pre-planned is also reflected in its actions immediately before the protests. Israel's top general said in an interview published on March 28th, 2 days before the peaceful protests dubbed the Great Return March was due to take place, that the IDF had already deployed more than 100 sharpshooters at the Gaza border. The Israeli military was clearly preparing for violence. By them. B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights on the occupied territories, published a screenshot of one of the IDF's deleted tweets. The leading human rights organization international advocacy officer, Sarit Mikeli, noted Israel Army takes full responsibility for killing all unarmed protesters and injuring only hundreds with live ammunition. The progressive U.S. Jewish group, If Not Now, which carried out its campaign against Israel's illegal 5-decade-long military occupation of Palestinian territories, commented on Twitter, "This is how the Israel army brags about shooting 773 Palestinians with live fire. Thanks to BT Islam for capturing this tweet, revealing the pride the IDF feels about casualties they inflict on unarmed protesters yesterday." I look at this through several lenses, none of which I like all that much, but I look at through several lenses. So let me explain how I see this. The first lens I look at this is the one I hate the most, because it feels like it gives somewhat of an out. It doesn't give an out. It just feels that way, which is why I dislike it. My rule is, for all intents and purposes, free will is somewhat of a myth. Now, if my rule is free will is somewhat of a myth, that people respond and act according to the system to which they're in, meaning at the end of the day, regardless of who you are, you're responding to the system, to the world, to the environment that you're in. You don't have this freedom of latitude where you can do anything you want. You are constrained in your thoughts and in your movements by your particular society. You know, I can't get up and go to Japan tomorrow if I don't have the money to go to Japan. That's a constraint. There may be things I don't even think about. When people didn't think about UFOs, that's a constraint. I mean, it's one of those things where their society has, programmed them in a way to have certain blinders to some things, being open to others. When the media is given a story that the United States is right, regardless of what the United States does, that's programming, that's propaganda. You have many people who don't even realize that's propaganda. They just suck it in and assume that that's the way the world is. There are constraints, meaning the way these people are behaving are based on their own self-interest, their own incentives. But the point is, they're incentives. The system itself is providing certain incentives for them to behave a particular way as opposed to behaving another way. If they want to steal land, well, they're incentivized to steal land, especially when there's nothing else to stop them from doing so. There's no consequences for it. The rest of the world looks. The rest of the world shakes their fists. But at the end of the day, the rest of the world does nothing as these people are being mangled and killed and brutalized. They're torturing children, and the rest of the world just stands by, wringing their hands. Yes, I look at this like anything else, as the soldiers who are carrying this out, the politicians who are handling this, they have certain incentives that push them to behave a particular way, and they're behaving that particular way. In this case, stealing of land, stealing of resources. That's an incentive. That's a drive of the system to which they've organized themselves. Their alliance with the United States, the protection that the United States affords, those are incentives. Like every other country, like every other person, the system to which they operate in have incentivized them to continue to operate that way. That's not an out. That's not an excuse. It's just kind of detailing this thing of my rule is my rule. Choice is somewhat of an illusion. Yes, they can choose within the confines of things, meaning within a narrow decision space. They can choose. Some people's decision space is wider than others. But in this case, Their choice is, for all intents and purposes, do we continue to occupy the land or not? If we don't occupy the land, what does it mean for us? They take the easier path. Fact is, though, that easier path has more in line with the destruction of Israel than the path of actually rational stopping this conflict. Israel could do it. And I would argue that it would make them safer as opposed to this path, which has everybody hating their guts. Not to mention a moral authority against that state, that deprived, nasty state. I mean, it's I don't know another word for it. Treacherous, barbaric. They've become the monsters that they sought to escape. They have an open-air ghetto. Congratulations. The second point in this is that this is not a religious conflict. People like to use this kind of term of religion as this kind of explanation of why these guys are at each other's throats and why they can't come to some reasonable conclusion to settle this. This has nothing to do with religion. Putting it in religion makes it feel ethereal. It's like, oh, it's intractable. There's nothing we can do about it. It's not religion. You had one side that stole somebody's land, that occupied that particular territory and fought wars in order to maintain the theft of that land. After they stole that land, they created an apartheid state with the protection of the United States to make sure that nobody else can hold security resolutions against them, and for all intents and purposes to ward off any attacks from anyone else into what they were doing. The war here, or the conflict here, has everything to do with the theft of land. That is a theft of land. It's stolen. It is against international law. It's a theft. That's the conflict. It's not a religious conflict. Yes, there may be religious elements to it, but the conflict, the stem of all this, is not religious. Calling this a religious conflict is like saying the civil rights movement was a religious conflict because Martin Luther King was a preacher. Yes, you may have elements in this that take on a religious tint in the way that they talk about this stuff and in the way that they organize themselves. But just because religion is the organizing principle doesn't necessarily mean that the conflict is inherently religious. It's about land. It's always been about land. You stole people's land. You've occupied people's land, and those people are pissed off that you've occupied their land. That's the origins. That's the basis. That's the bare bones of this particular conflict. Now, from the other part to this, my personal identification with this. I've said before, I've visited Jerusalem and I've visited areas of Palestine. I was just traveling. I was going from country to country to country. And one of the places that I hit was, what was it? It was Egypt. And I initially was supposed to take a flight from Egypt to Nepal. And instead, I didn't have a schedule. I was winging it. When I think I was 30, I was around 30. 29 or something to that effect. And the company I was working at, I got sick. And I had a transplant, and the transplant failed. And as the transplant was failing, they fired me. When I told them, I said, look, I'm having medical issues and everything else. I was in the hospital, and I get an email saying, congratulations, you've been in this particular company for a year. I've been there longer than a year, but I went back to the company. They said if I ever wanted to come back. So I came back. And the very next letter was, while I was in the hospital, we need to talk. when you get out the hospital, stop by. And hey, we can stop by the hospital if you need to stop by. And essentially, we need to tell you that you're fired while you're in the hospital. Cupid.com. Cupid.com. So I said, well, fuck it. I'm going to travel. I want to travel. My girlfriend at the time was in Australia. I booked a ticket for a birthday, and I went to Australia. And after that trip, I was hooked. I was like, oh my God. As an American, my passport allows me to go pretty much anywhere on the planet, and I haven't been using a passport. I'm going to use the shit out of this thing. And I wasn't working. I had a little money in the bank saved up from just all the time working. And I booked a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. I've always wanted to go. And I got stoned in one place after the next. And after Amsterdam, I booked the ticket to Egypt. And I remember going to the Amsterdam airport. I'm like, all right, Let me empty my pockets of everything that I have because I don't want that dog to sniff me or come after me. In fact, is I've smoked so much pot, the dog may still come after me if I don't have anything on me. Now, I go to Egypt, and I'm in Egypt for a very long time, for a few months. And the first week, I am angry at everybody because I'm like, oh my God, these people are getting on my goddamn nerves. Everything is bothering, etc., etc. And after a while, I begin to understand how it works and how you need to function when you're there. And the trip becomes a little easier. It's culture shock to some degree. Now, from Egypt, I was supposed to go to Nepal. And instead of going to Nepal, I said, fuck it. Let's go overland. And I was like, I found a way to go overland. And I got the ticket from Nepal. Essentially changing to something else. And I went overland. And I took the bus all the way up through Egypt, all the way to the border of Eliad. And then, you know, at that point, you're crossing into Jerusalem. And I realized when I crossed into, crossing to Eliad. Eliad is in Israel. And I realized after crossing into Israel, it felt like little America. It felt like little America. Like, what I mean by that is, the Muslim countries that you go to have a certain look about them. They have a certain feel. Like, it's different. It's a different feel to it. And so, because there's a different feel to it, and you cross into Israel, and it's, you know, you're like on a beach. You have all these people just hanging around in shorts. Many of them speak English extremely well. And it looked different. It looked like America. And so, I hadn't booked any reservations or anything else. So, for the 45 minutes that I had before my bus left, I booked my reservations to Jerusalem. And you get to Jerusalem, and you're checked everywhere you go. Every mall that you go into, you're checked. You see soldiers just walking around with these heavy weapons and everything else. I needed a visa because I needed to get a visa to go through Jordan. And the Jordanian embassy was in Tel Aviv. So I'd get a fucking cabbie, to take me to Tel Aviv. That guy was a fucking asshole. Couldn't stand his ass. And he's in the bus talking about how awesome George Bush is, and George Bush was a strong man and all this other stuff. And even though I wasn't necessarily fully politically aware, I know I hated George Bush's ass. And I'm like, this guy is a fucking idiot. This guy's a fucking asshole. And I think this guy's trying to cheat me out of my thing. I get to the Jordanian embassy. Tel Aviv looks like Beverly Hills. It is fucking gorgeous. And the women are extraordinarily attractive. That was the other part of Israel. They were fucking gorgeous. They were gorgeous. Just saying, I'm a guy. Now, I get to the Jordanian embassy, and I meet this Belgian Palestinian. Now, I don't have cash, and they're not taking cards. And she pays my way. She said, look, just pay it forward. And being a guy, I'm like, hey, can I at least take you to dinner? Let me take you to dinner. Or take you to lunch. Just something. I mean, you paid my way. I want to give you the money back. And she said, well, I'm going to Palestine. I'm going to Bethlehem. You're welcome to come with me. And I'm like, whoa, is that safe? Now, I'm saying, whoa, is that safe? Because I have full awareness that I am an American. These guys are aligned with America. And if I'm going into Palestinian territories, is the fact that I'm America going to be a problem for me? Not necessarily for them. It's going to be a problem for me and my ass who's solo traveling in these areas. She said, that's where I'm going. And no, I don't think it's a problem. And so I went. I'm a guy. She's extremely attractive. And she's ferocious. As we're traveling, we're on a bus in Jerusalem, and she is tearing down Israel like nobody's business. And she is scaring the shit out of me. It's like you have all these soldiers on this bus, and she's like, they should open the borders. They should open the borders. They're treating us horribly. Now, she's Belgian Palestinian, so she can go in and out. Technically, she's using a Belgian passport, but she's Belgian Palestinian. She's ferocious, and she has a right to be ferocious. And I found myself in many situations like, well, if they open the borders, there's a chance that somebody could kill them. It's like, I agree with you, but opening the border seems counterproductive, at least in the way that this stuff has been arranged. And she's like, well, they're mistreating us. I agree. It's a ghetto. I agree. I agree. It's an apartheid state. I agree. And so we get to Bethlehem. We get to the place. We're walking through this checkpoint. Now, I, as an American, stroll right through the checkpoint. There's a line going back for like 20, 30 minutes for them, for the Palestinians, to get through the checkpoint. She's showing me this, and she's walking me around in this particular area. And at some point, some guy starts screaming and cursing out obscenities. I'm eating corn like an asshole because I stopped by a vendor and was hungry because I've been out all day. And I'm sitting there looking like a geek, like just chomping away. And this guy is screaming obscenities. And I'm only kind of partially hearing him because it's not something that you would typically deal with people screaming obscenities in English. You're in a different fucking country. She snaps away from me and attacks the guy. Outright attacks the guy. I think she hits the guy. She like threatens the guy, scares the shit out the guy. He shuts up about the obscenities. That's the first part. Terrifies the guy. And she comes back and says, you can't allow that. I'm telling you, she's ferocious. You can't allow that. That's unacceptable. And she's saying that he was pissed off because her hair wasn't covered. She's ferocious. She's ferocious. There are some people there, like anybody else, that are extremists. You find that anywhere. Is that the totality of the people there? No. And my experience was I had earrings on, I had tattoos, and there were people who would say, what's with all the jewelry? What the fuck is with this guy? And she's like, he's American. He's like, oh, okay, fair enough. They didn't hate me because I was an American. None of that stuff took place. They were human beings. They were just people. This is the other context that I look at this through. They were just human beings. She was just a human being. The guy who gave me the corn was just a human being. The people, or the guy who drove the bus, was just a human being. All of these people were human beings. The people that they mowed down, that they showed a reckless disregard for their human lives, they were just human beings. People always ask, where are the peaceful protesters in Gaza? Where's the Martin Luther King in Gaza? This was a peaceful protest. And fact is, they were occupying their land. It is an open-air ghetto. They're putting kids in prison. They're torturing, beating, breaking, injuring. And the world stands by. It wrings their hands, but the world does nothing. And to put a finer point on the world does nothing, a UN Security Council was shot down today by guess who? The United States. The United States blocked a condemning resolution. That maniac. United States blocked UN resolution condemning Israel for deaths in the Gaza clash. The last lens I look at this is through past conflicts. In the last conflict, Israel killed over 2,000 people, 80% of which were civilians. It was more than 80%, but were civilians. Innocent. They went into those areas dropping bombs on houses to alert them that larger bombs were going to come in a few minutes. They used dumb bombs. They used rounds. Anybody that was out was essentially considered fair game, and they shot those people. Listen to the confessions of the IDF on the last issue. The reason I'm telling you all this is because this is the lens that I look at this through. Everything that I've just said. That's how I view this conflict. When I view this conflict, I'm viewing it through the stuff that has taken place over the past with relation to the way Israel has behaved. And with my own experiences being there and interacting with people. And by the way, leading more to the no free will stuff, the Israelis, I fucking love that place. If you're interacting with them and they don't think that you're a threat to them, they think you're fucking, you interact with them like you interact with anyone else. When I was going from Israel to Jordan, the radio, there was a guy in the store, and the guy had a radio, and he was playing like rock music or something like that. And I was talking to him, and he says, yeah, man, you're not going to be able to hear this over there. So let me crank this shit up one time. He turns the radio up really loud. He's like, take it in. They're just human beings. But fact is, human beings can do monstrous things when those human beings have a certain workable point of view that would allow them to excuse the things that they're doing. Especially when there's no external consequence for those things, at least not overt. People wringing their hands is not the same thing as a consequence. It's not the same thing. We sanction all of these other countries for behavior that we don't particularly like. What about this? What about massacres? What about killing people in open-air ghettos? What about holding people in open-air ghettos in the first place? Take a look at this. This is testimony from Israeli soldiers in that last conflict.
We begin today's show with a new report based on testimonies of Israeli soldiers that concludes the massive civilian death toll from last summer's Israeli assault on Gaza resulted from a policy of indiscriminate fire. The Israeli Veterans Group, breaking the silence, released testimonies of more than 60 Israeli officers and soldiers, which it says illustrate a, quote, broad ethical failure that comes from the top of the chain of command. More than 2,200 Palestinians were killed in the assault, the vast majority of them civilians. On Israel's side, 73 people were killed, all but 6 of them soldiers. During the 50-day operation, more than 20,000 Palestinian homes were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of people are still displaced.
In a video made by Breaking the Silence, a first sergeant in the Israeli military, his voice distorted, describes how a commander told him there are no innocent civilians, and to assume anyone within 200 or 400 meters of the Israeli Defense Forces was an enemy.
Commander announced, "Folks, tomorrow we enter. I want you to be determined, task-oriented, and confident. The entire nation is behind you." The usual speeches. And then he spoke about the rules of engagement. And I quote, "The rules of engagement are, any person at a distance that could put you at risk, you kill him with no need for clearance," meaning anyone at a distance of 200, 300, 400 meters from us isn't an ordinary civilian. According to IDF logic, he must be there for a reason, because an ordinary civilian would flee the area. And so we must kill him with no need for clearance. For me, it was just spine-tingling. I said to him, "Let me get this straight. Any person I see in the neighborhood where we're headed, I spot him and kill him?" He said, "Yes. Any sane person who sees a tank battalion in his neighborhood will run away. If he sticks around, then he's up to something. And if he's up to something, it's against you. So shoot him."
By the way, this was the same logic that the United States was doing under Barack Obama when they were bombing other countries. Now, it was a slight modification for it. Under Obama's logic, he didn't want to give the actual civilian death toll because the fact is the United States did not know who they were bombing. 95% of the people in some of those raids or some of those bombing campaigns in certain areas were civilians. Even if you take that number from 95% and say, dude, that's magnificently high. Let's say it's 60%. Let's say when they were doing their bombing, 60% of the people they hit were civilians. That number still means that the majority of the people that you're hitting are civilians. You're just bombing civilians. Every so often you hit a terrorist, the majority of the people that you're hitting are civilians. Well, you don't want to tell American people that the majority of the people that you're hitting are civilians. So you tell your stenographers that we haven't hit that many civilians. Now, what the stenographers don't necessarily tell you is that they're using an Orwellian term to explain the idea of what a civilian is. Just because they're using a word, you're assuming that the word that they're using is used in the same way that you yourself would use the word. They understand that you are looking at that word and you're getting a certain connotation from that word, which is why they're using that word in the first place, even though they're giving that word somewhat of a different definition. If someone is in the area and they're 16 years or older, they're not a civilian. They're terrorists. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the area messing around with people who we believe to be terrorists. But fact is, they don't know. When the Reuters agent was gunned down by that military pilot, he didn't know. He didn't know who he was killing. He didn't know who he was shooting. They killed a Reuters agent. Do you think they would kill that Reuters agent knowingly? Fact is, in many of these raids, the majority of which, they did not know who they're killing. What he's saying here is not that far out of the ordinary from the standpoint of the United States and how our rules of engagement, at least when we're talking about in the Middle East. Let's keep going. I just want to interject that point because that sounds so amazing. Well, if they're hanging around, they're clearly terrorists. Otherwise, they wouldn't hang around. Simple, straightforward logic. Yeah, that's a massive assumption. That's a massive assumption. That's utterly ridiculous. You've ultimately have told your people you can go in and shoot whoever. Everybody's fair game under that logic. Let's let them keep going.
So I tried to dig a little deeper and asked, what if it's an innocent civilian? He said, there are no innocent civilians. Your presumption should be that anyone within the area of battle, 200, 300, 400 meters from you, is your enemy.
That was an Israeli Defense Force, IDF soldier, who served during last summer's Israeli assault on Gaza, known as Operation Protective Edge. His testimony is part of a new report just released by the veterans group Breaking the Silence. For more, we go to Tel Aviv, Israel, where we're joined by Avner Varyahu, Director of Public Outreach at Breaking the Silence. He's a former IDF soldier who served from 2004 to 7 as a sergeant in a special operations unit around Nablus and Jenin. We welcome you, Avner, to Democracy Now! Talk about the number of people who are speaking out and why you have done this now.
So hi, Amy. We're a group, Breaking the Silence as an organization, a group of former IDF soldiers, and actually some of us are still current IDF soldiers. Throughout the years, we've met more than 1,000 soldiers. In this time around, this summer, when the summer ended and we realized, we saw the amount of damage, we realized that something went terribly wrong. And we actually started getting phone calls, emails from soldiers who were themselves in this operation. And then we ourselves also started reaching out to people. So we're talking about, as you said, more than 60 soldiers. A third of them are officers, which is a very high number for us. And we're talking about people that all served during the summer in different positions.
All right, this guy is slow talking. What? Protective Edge? No harm. No harm. No harm meant. He's just talking real slow. Protective Edge is what they did. That was the name of the of the operation that they took last time. Breaking Silence is a website. I'm putting that link at the bottom. And it's of Israeli soldiers coming out talking about the orders that they were giving, what they did, some of the stuff, the chaos that they were causing. In one case, talking about dropping the bombs on the houses. I've read multiple accounts on this. They would drop a bomb on a house and not give people enough time to get out the house, making the point that if the person is on a second or third floor, how in the world can you get down in time before that actual bomb hits the house? This is the context that I look through this in. This is the context. Look, the rest of the world is impotent on this. And the rest of the world is full of it. They wring their hands, but at the end of the day, they don't do anything. Israel is holding children in their prisons. They're torturing other human beings. Even peaceful protesters are shot and killed and put into prison, being tortured. And the rest of the world doesn't say squat. The rest of the world knows, and they don't say squat. Their land has been stolen from them. Are you telling me that they don't have the right to protest and be pissed off that you're stealing their land and the rest of the world doesn't say anything? They put these people in an open-air ghetto in somewhat of an apartheid state. And the rest of the world, the court of The Hague, said it was looking into the Philippines and Duarte. Duarte has been out there killing and murdering drug dealers. That is a horrible thing. These people have been occupying and stealing land against international law for the past 50, 60 years. Are you shitting me? Where is the legitimacy of the World Court when the World Court is looking at Duarte in this way and is giving Israel a complete pass? That is insane. That is absolutely insane. You lose your legitimacy when you do stuff like that. You lose your legitimacy. Where is your integrity? Where is any integrity in that process? What way, how, what judge, what group, what individuals have been organized in this way that come together of the crimes that have been taking place over the last 20, 30 years? The people who have done really vile and nasty and disgusting things that warrant the World Court. What body came together and gave Israel a pass, gave George Bush a pass, gave all these people, Tony Blair, a pass, gave all these people a pass, and jumped all the way to Duarte? You have no legitimacy as a world court. Zero. Zero. If these type of crimes take place and you're supposed to be blind to justice, why aren't you bringing people to trial who've been stealing and murdering other human beings? Flouting international law. Why? That's what I want to know. Why? This is horrendous. This is the lens that I look at this atrocity through. This is a continued pattern of disregard of life, because they don't need to regard life in the case where the rest of the world stands mum. Wring your hands all you want. If you're not going to do anything, it doesn't matter. So, yes, Israel once again murders a bunch of Palestinians. The world tepidly upset, and life goes on in misery and terror for the people of Palestine. Fucking amazing. Well, I can't believe 65 people are up this late. Can't believe it. I think I saw Terry here. Okay, maybe I saw a ghost. To mostly young, I wonder where these people who spoke out are today. George Pagad, that's disturbing. Technical word support, maybe so, but he also made it so he had no clear successor. Chuck E. Cheese. Wasn't there some kind of UN sanction that was to be enacted on Israel like a year ago, and the vote was 15-1 and the United States voted it? I think Nikki Haley. So there was a sanction, well, not a sanction, there was a UN resolution vote when Obama was in office, the very last vote that Obama allowed to go through, but there were no penalties associated with it. It was just a condemnation of Israel for stealing, occupying, murdering Palestinians. But there was no force behind the document. The document has no bearing at all. It's just a wag of the finger for all intents and purposes. Even with that wag of the finger, Israel flipped out, hysterical. How dare you, sir? Look, fact is, Israel has become the monster that they themselves scream and cry about. From the standpoint of Germany, they have an open-air ghetto. No, they're not necessarily putting people in ovens and stuff like that. So don't misunderstand where I'm going with this. I'm making the point of ghetto. They're living in an open-air ghetto. And that ghetto is getting smaller. That ghetto is water shortages, medical supply shortages because of the blockades. They're putting people in prisons. These people came out for a peaceful protest. Israel said itself, they had kids and they had people who were handicapped. And they ended up shooting into a crowd of people. One side had bottles, one side had rocks. The other side had live ammunition and used that live ammunition. Look, if you're occupying somebody's land, you can't bitch and moan about those people wanting their land back and being extraordinarily angry about wanting their land back. Fact is, you're creating a monster. You yourself have become a monster, but in you becoming a monster, you're also creating a monster. You have all of these forces allied against you. You have the rest of the world condemning you for your behavior. You have become a rogue state. Literally, a rogue state. An apartheid state. Just as bad as South Africa in the way that you've organized your affairs. Come back to the light. Come back to the light. I found a country of beautiful people. That's what I found when I was in Israel. And on any other topic that you're talking about, seemed perfectly reasonable, perfectly sound, and everything else. And on that particular issue, hawks. Absolute hawks. Motivated purely by self-interest. We're stealing other people's lands, and it's okay. We have the backing of the United States, it's okay. We have billions of dollars. We have nuclear weapons. The world is good. We just have to bash and injure and break the people's land who was already here before we got here. And that right for land shit is ridiculous. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. This idea that because you were there in the land at one point, you can always go back to that particular land. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Some religious argument that they've come out, pulled out their ass in order to justify the theft of land. That's like, so South Africa. So based on that logic, the Africans that are in South Africa that now have taken power in the government should be able to steal the land from whites. Just take it from them. I mean, ultimately, the whites got that land by stealing it from them and colonizing and putting it in political structures. Under that logic, everybody should be perfectly okay with those Africans stripping the white farm owners of their land and say, fuck off. We have power now, and in having power now, you guys have said that it's just perfectly okay for people with power to do that power whatever they want to do with that power. Two justifications. A, if you have the power to do it, it's self-justifying. Once you do it, you just need to put a government, make a law, say it's okay. The second part, we were here first. You stole the land, you colonized the land, you put in political structures. We're taking it back. They should be okay with it. It's their land. They're still there. And you're continuing to steal other land. Not to mention the provocations that get these people to throw rocks at you, then you open shooting them. It's not, oftentimes you hear them say, oh, we were provoked into shooting people. No. Many times the Israeli soldiers would provoke the kids or provoke whoever's out there. Those people will respond back. And then Israel would open with fire and say, hey, we're provoked. We're provoked. They threw a rock at us. We had no choice. We had no choice. Crystal Cole, the United States soldiers have released similar testimony, particularly in 2008. Yes, when a bunch of vets bared witness in Congress. It was called Winter Soldier, and it was hosted by Iraq Veterans Against the War. Yes. I remember that. Crystal Colin. I remember that. Those stories were chilling, what they were saying. One guy was talking about how a sniper murdered somebody at a wedding party. He was sitting on the roof. Another case where they kicked in the door, terrified everybody who was in the room, ended up killing one of the people who were in the room. These people were maniacs. The soldier who was telling this was crying as he was telling the story. Look, you put people in a certain point of view and you send those people across into another country and you tell them that you're doing this for your country and that here's a gun, and go into that house and murder somebody. In other cases, you tell them to go in that house and get X, Y, Z information. The thing is, that person may not even have that information. And you've sent them with a task where the life of the people who are there is subordinate to the mission that they're taking on. That is their workable point of view. That is what's in their heads. If we kill somebody in pursuit of this, how bad? The rest of the public is never going to know. It's never going to get to the light of day. Our bad. We fucked up. We'll do it better next time. Fact is, though, you have a lot of people who are doing some really heinous and nasty shit. There were some people who were destroying monuments because they were mad that their friend had died. Yes, they're mad that their friend died, but you're in their country murdering them. It's like shit, man. But this is the point of view that these people have. This is what's infused into their heads when they're joining the military like this. They become maniacs. But what do you expect them to be? You're sending them there to kill and murder other human beings. They become the thing that you send them there to be. So yeah. Autocorrect is maddening. What's going on? Palestinians should just demand a right to citizenship in Israel. SSS. That will be interesting. And to be honest, at this point, I don't know how you could... How can you have a two-state solution when they've taken that much land and intentionally broken the land into these sections to create division between so they can't necessarily come together in some way? Yeah, how do you remain at that point? How do you remain at that point? How do you become a land like that after they've stolen so much? Demanding citizenship in Israel is an interesting solution. I've heard the one-state solution thing. I don't know too much about it, but it's an interesting solution. Palestinians would not get equal rights. That this is an apartheid state unequal. To Tabitha Enriquez, that is exactly what it is. Check it. He's right-wingers justified by saying the Palestinian state would be worse. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. You know, the wild part about this is at one point, Jews and Arabs did live together in a certain harmony. At the point where Jews decide they want to steal it all, then yeah, at that point you have conflict. Fact is, it's their state to do whatever they want with that state. If Palestinians had a state to themselves, then Palestinians would have a state to themselves. It's their choice. If it's a shithole of a state, it's a shithole of a state. If it's an awesome state, it's an awesome state. But it's not for Israel to make the determination on whether or not they should have a state, especially when they're stealing their land. I mean, come on. Let's be honest. Call it what it is. It is an apartheid state. Any justification for what it is kind of besides the point. It is exactly what it is. At the very least, call it what it is before you try to come up with some justification for why it's that thing. George pop up. Yeah, me too. Good to see another around these parts, another Aussie. The Israelis would absolutely lose in a court of public opinion and legally. They're already losing legally. They don't care about the legality of this. They just do it. Yeah. Yep, Israel right-wing government following a lot of techniques from Nazis, like how my country, the Philippines, unofficially practices water torture techniques, what they practice in the IJA. Yeah. You know, it's amazing how these countries always talking about how monstrous people are with torture, but they themselves use torture. And if you're from the Philippines, they're looking at Duterte. They're looking at the prime minister or president. I don't know which one he is, but they're looking at him. The criminal court. They're literally looking at him. Now, I think he's a horrible fucking guy. He's out there murdering drug dealers. So don't misunderstand me. But are there other miserable and horrible fucking people that may warrant the International Court of Justice or Criminal Court? How about the guy who murdered 1 million people? How about that guy? How about that guy? How about the guy that completely destabilized the Middle East, that has cost trillions of dollars in destabilizing that particular area of the globe, that has spread terrorism all throughout the globe, that has destabilized Europe from the wars that were caused by invading that country? How about that guy? How about that guy? Where on earth is your legitimacy if you're going to go after Duterte, but you completely jump over other people who has a large number of murders on their record? Even Obama has killed thousands of civilians. You understand, just being a president, just wrapping yourself in the flag doesn't necessarily negate you doing nasty and heinous things. And for whatever reason, the International Criminal Court has a blind spot for America. Blind spot for fucking America. It's amazing. The Hague, yeah, The Hague. Yeah, The Hague. They are talking about, what's it, Gina Haspel. If she leaves into Europe, she would get arrested and dragged before The Hague. It should be more. Gina Haspel was somebody doing a job. That job was nasty and disgusting and heinous, but somebody was telling her to do that job. If you're saying that she should be also called to account, then how can you say that the people who gave her the orders should not be called to account? I don't understand it. How can the International Criminal Court look at one, but completely ignore the people, the chain of command that was giving her the order to do those things? What's worse? The person who said do it, or the person who did it? Now, yes, the person who did it is horrible, but the person who gave the order is just as bad and should also be prosecuted. George Bush has already admitted that I said, hell yeah, waterboard him. He's just admitted to torture. A U.S. president just admitted to torture. Where's The Hague? Where's The Hague? Where's the legitimacy of The Hague at that point if The Hague is mum and silent on that issue? Tell me about some goddamn criminal court. They've lost their legitimacy. 1,000 times over, they've lost their legitimacy. What we're doing alone in Syria, they've lost their legitimacy. We've been murdered. Donald Trump has upped the number of civilians that were being murdered by the U.S. military. He's even given power back over to the CIA so people don't know the number of people that are being murdered. Where's The Hague? Where's The Hague? Karl Malone, the United States is not a signatory of the Rome Statute recognizing the ICC and passing law. American Service Members Protection Act allow the United States to invade the Netherlands should an American be prosecuted. Yes, they should be prosecuted. Whether Americans sign onto it is kind of besides the point, right? If the rest of the world is looking at something as an atrocity, are you telling me that the rest of the world doesn't engage? France is talking about going into Syria. What justification does France have in it going to some other country? What? Does the International Criminal Court look at this and stand mum? Yes, they do. It has nothing to do with whether they're signatories or not. If some travesty is being committed, if some heinous crime is being committed, are you telling me that the rest of the countries of the world won't intervene? They intervene into Libya. The United States, the UK, and France intervene into Libya, making a moral justification of their own that this was necessary to do. They intervene into another country. They set the precedent that other countries can intervene into international affairs when they believe that something is going to take place or something is warranted. The precedent has already been set by the United States. Whether they are signatory or not is kind of besides the point. Other countries can make determinations on when they want to do something and when they don't want to do something. The fact that the United States, the UK, and France made a decision unilaterally, at least from the Western power standpoint, to go into that country, shows the precedent that it doesn't matter whether the United States is a signatory or not. They could be held accountable like anybody else. They should be held accountable. All of those people who are okay with this should be held accountable. And the same thing with Israel. They should be held accountable for the crimes that they've committed. Breaking international law, flagrantly breaking international law and stealing those lands. What's wild about it, they scream and bitch and moan that people are trying to stop Israel from being a state and Hamas wants to destroy Israel while actively stopping Palestine from having a state. Talk about irony. Talk about amazing goddamn irony. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. I'm not going to keep this one. It's 3 in the morning. So if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. All the links at the bottom, Breaking the Silence, in addition to the Democracy Now! Tape that has the guy on it. So have a good one, guys, and good night.